All right, today we're going to talk about why the first 100,000 is the hardest. The first 100,000 is the hardest to save because of the way compound interest works. Compound interest works given time. Given time. Over time, your money earns interest. And your money, your interest, earns interest on top of that, and it compounds and adds on top of itself, compounding interest, right? So the reason why the first 100 is the hardest to get is due to lack of time. And typically, also, when you first start out working, you're not making a lot of money. So the amount of money that you're putting in also is very small, right? Very little amount of money. So between the time, lack of time, and the lack of money, the first 100,000 is the hardest. Now let's take that a little bit further. We talked about saving our first million. That's $500 over 30 years at 10% interest rate gets you to roughly 1 million. Actually, it's 1.1, right? And don't quote me on 10%. I'm just using that number because it's a nice round number and it's easy to think about. Okay? The S&P again has averaged 8 to 10% over the last 100 or so years. And over the last 15, 16, 17 years, it's actually averaged close to 15%. 15% ROI per year. That means, if you had 100,000 5 years ago, you would have now 200,000 without adding any additional money into your account. Most people's 401k accounts should have doubled in the last 5 years. Okay, so let's break down again why that first 100,000 is so hard. Okay? It takes 10 years, $500 a month, 10% ROI, takes 10 years to get to 100,000. Now watch what happens with the next 10 years. Year 20, you should be at $381,000. $381,000. So the first decade, you got 100,000. Second decade, you actually added on $280,000. That's almost 3 times as much in the same amount of time, right? 10 years versus 10 years. The second 10 years actually gave you almost 3 times the amount of money. Why is that? Because of compound interest. Your money is literally making money on top of itself. You're making more and more interest over time. Let's go to year 30 when we're supposed to reach 1.1 million, right? Year 20, you're at $380,000. Year 30, you're at 1.1 million. That's $700,000 that you got in the third decade. All right? So the first 10 years got you 100,000. Second 10 years, you added on 280,000. The third 10 years, due to all that interest compounding in on itself, you actually got 700,000. In other words, it took you 10 years to make the first 100,000. The second 100,000 probably happened within 5 years. The third 100,000 probably happened in the next 3 years. And so on. You can see where this is going. By the time you hit year 30, you reach 1.1 million. 10% of that is $110,000. The next year, year 31, you're actually making $110,000. So the first 100,000 took you 10 years. In year 30, that next 100,000 took you less than 1 year. So you see the amount of time that it takes to get to the next level, like a video game, right? Like building up points in a video game. The time just shortens to the next level. It gets easier and easier and easier. The amount of time that it takes to climb to the next level is shorter and shorter and shorter. So That's why it's imperative that you start early. Like if you're like me and closing in on 50 and you're trying to save a little bit of money, you think, oh my God, I'm gonna have to retire in the next 10 to 15 years. I better start saving. It's almost pointless. It's almost pointless because one, you simply don't have the time to compound any interest, right? It's going to take you 10 years to get that first $100,000. If you're 50, you're going to save aggressively for the next 10 years and reach $100,000. Really, doesn't do a lot. And two, when you're at that age, most advisors would say you no longer have the risk tolerance that the young have. You're going to want to put some amount of money into a less volatile investment than the S&P. Therefore, you're not growing as fast and you're not getting as much interest as fast as somebody who's younger, who's 21 years old, just out of college, getting his first job. He can afford to take all that risk and put all the money, his entire, savings into an S&P 500 fund and grow aggressively at 8 to 10%. So once again, why is the first 100,000 the hardest to get? Lack of time. So start early. And because, when you're young or when you first start out, right, you're not making a lot of money. So you're not able to put in 500 per month, right? You may be starting out $50 a month, 100 a month. And then as every step along the way in your career, every time you do overtime, you get a promotion or you get a bonus, throw in some extra money. Start from 100, then 200, then 300, then you work your way to 500 and you get to your 100,000, hopefully within about 10 years, right? And then it just gets faster and faster and faster. It's a nice little game to play. I love video games, and this is just another video game where I look at the numbers and it compounding in on itself, and I look forward to the next level in my game. And the levels I reach new levels faster and faster and faster because I started 20-something years ago. Not yet 30. 20-something years ago, and it's still growing very fast. So start soon. Start right now. Start your compounding game. Take care.